The officers were standing up in the line of fire to help those in danger and to find out where those horrible shots were coming from. Words cannot describe the bravery that the whole world witnessed on Sunday night. The message that I have is we have a great country, and we are there for you, and they're there for us.
Mr. President, do you have a gun violence problem?
We're not going to talk about that today.
Thoughts and prayers while they head to the bank to cash their NRA check.
We cannot let this tragedy, this American tragedy, another in a long line of American tragedies, fall out of our hearts and minds too quickly.
Well, after the tragedy, calls on Capitol Hill for some action, some different than others. But what's really gaining some momentum, it seems, is so-called bump stocks that the Las Vegas shooter used to turn a semi-automatic rifle into a near machine gun. To ban those, they were legalized by the ATF during the Obama administration, and now really lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are looking at that.
At the very least, back a bill that stops the killer accelerators like these bump stocks. This device has no purpose but to convert an already deadly weapon into a completely lethal carnage force multiplier.
I think that Congress should look into that to see if perhaps they should be outlawed.
I think there's no question we ought to look into that.
So with that, let's bring in our panel. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. Ari Fleischer, former White House press secretary, and Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today. Okay, Molly, what about this momentum on Capitol Hill for something?
Right. Well, at least in this case, we're talking about something that was involved in this actual deadly incident, which is not usually the case when we go through this ritual of talking about gun control after any deadly event. And that is something we kind of do to make ourselves feel better about the fact that no amount of gun regulation is going to prevent people who are hell-bent on murdering people from doing so. And we've learned that through so many terrorist incidents involving planes, trucks, fertilizer, and any number of other things. So we're pretending we're having a debate about gun control, but we're really having a debate about the nature of evil and whether a big enough government can contain it.
All right.
Well, you know, normally when these things happen, you hear people saying, why can't we do something? What can be done to stop it? And I don't blame people for having that reaction. It's a humane reaction. It is what you do when something goes wrong. You say, how do we stop it from ever happening again? I do think you have to pause, learn what you can from this, and not rush into it, because that minimizes the politicization of it. But the broader point here about automatic weapon fire, whether it's the barrel stocks or whatever it is, yeah, we do not want to be a nation where you can get your hands on a machine gun and use it. So I think there will be some coming together along those lines, and I would like to see that. The thing I'd like to see less of, frankly, is what Secretary Clinton tweeted this morning about silencers, which had absolutely nothing to do with this, and is a distortion of the debate about what really suppressors do, because you will still hear the gunshot just like it's a jackhammer. So when something goes wrong like this, you hate to see the politicians rush in to make hay. What you do want to see is people try to find some reasonable solution. I think in this case there can be one for automatic weapons.
There is, Susan, an interesting development with the politics of it. If you look not at Republicans but at Democrats, the National Journal pointing out that 6 red state Senate Democrats, largely representing rural states, up for re-election in 2018. Not one came out for more gun control in the wake of the Vegas killings. West Virginia's Joe Manchin, co-sponsored bipartisan legislation expanding the scope of background checks, has been notably quiet. Heidi Heitkamp, North Dakota, voted against the background check bill, has no interest in bringing up gun control in the run-up to her re-election campaign. And Senator Claire McCaskill, the most liberal of the bunch, says National Journal, simply released an anodyne statement calling the Vegas attack evil and offering support for law enforcement. She knows the politics in Missouri better than the armchair pundits who insist that gun control is a slam dunk issue. It's an interesting take that those election concerns.
I think that Democrats have concluded it's not a slam dunk issue, that even though you can look at polling on something like background checks and see that 8 or 9 out of 10 of Americans support that gun control is an issue that has hurt Democrats running for office. And what surprised me in the wake of this particular terrible tragedy was the lack of a fervent debate. You know, remember after Sandy Hook, a huge debate. Even after the Orlando Pulse shootings, Democrats took over the floor of Congress to talk about it for a day. You didn't see that here. You get the feeling that this is not something that Democrats are actually going to pursue in an aggressive way. And I'll tell you, I have one question about the bump stock issue that of which there is some conversation. The NRA has had a no step is permissible attitude because it's a slippery slope. That's been, I think, their general argument. Will the NRA endorse this legislation?
I mean, that is a great question, Molly. I mean, is there a point where some give has to be given?
Well, I think certainly there are all sorts of proposals that are out there where this could be part of a compromise. For instance, on allowing suppressors, not silencers. You know, we talk about these things and we don't really know about it. Background checks, by the way, I just want to point out, we already do background checks on almost everyone who purchases
a gun show.
gun.
So the gun show loophole. There's been a lot of talk about
gun show loophole. But that's one of the things I think is probably a problem here. Is so many people who are talking about these issues clearly aren't people who use and fire weapons, and many people in the country do.
Yeah, but
so
my
the more
point
that
is,
people talk
does the NRA come off? Is there some offer here? Does Trump?
Right.
Does President Trump somehow negotiate something with his friends with the NRA to come off on something?
So it's entirely possible, because this is the kind of thing that a lot of people who fire weapons don't care that much about relative to other issues, so it could be part of a compromise. What I would encourage people to be understanding of is you can actually simulate a rapid fire just using your belt loop. You don't actually need one of these things. You can also, with 3D printing, there's no way we're going to actually be able to control evil people who want to use tools to commit mass murder. And that's something that we also have to think of, because there are issues. Like, one of the things about this guy is yet the latest murderer who grew up in a fatherless home. Now, it's very difficult to deal with that societal crisis of how most people who are in our prisons, most people who have severe problems, grow up in fatherless homes. But this would be something that a lot of people could work on that could pay dividends in the future.
You know, it's interesting you point to the shooter. This is the president talking about the Las Vegas gunman today.
I can tell you it's a very sick man. He was a very demented person. We haven't seen that yet, but you will know very soon if we find something. We're looking very, very hard.
And Ari, he was pressed about that by the pool before he got on Marine One, and he said it's going to come out soon. So maybe he's kind of foreshadowing whatever the police are learning.
Well, typically the president would get a briefing on what information they have found in the course of an investigation, asking him not to reveal it yet because they don't want to compromise any information as more comes in. So he might know something. I think it's clear already. If it was terrorism, we all would have known it. So I don't think that's probably ruled out. But let me go back to a point Molly was making earlier and where this is going legislatively. Don't look for a Chuck Nancy deal on this one.
No.
This is not going to be that type of compromise. If there is something to be legislated, it's going to be incredibly narrow. I think it's going to be something that can garner virtually unanimous support on Capitol Hill, all aimed, again, at just automatic weapon fire. There was a fascinating op-ed in the Washington Post this morning by a woman. She was described as a statistician and a former news writer at 538, the website. Leah Labresco. She said, I am not convinced gun control, I'm sorry, her headline on her story was, I used to think gun control was the answer. My research told me otherwise. It was a fascinating, detailed read, nonpartisan, and I think it's why the Democrats aren't going to push for a fight on this. They don't have the facts on their side, as the statistician
By the
showed.
way, I want to turn to the next panel, but Representative Carlos Curbelo from Florida is writing a bill on bump stock and has bipartisan support.